Hello, everybody, and welcome again back to Procrastinator's Pitstop. We do have another amazing guest here for you today, Mr. Terry Tucker. Terry has a very diverse and dynamic professional background, frequently reinventing himself throughout his career. After graduating from the Citadel, where he played NCAA Division basketball, he actually began his career in the marketing department at Wendy's International in Dublin, Ohio. He then transitioned to hospital administration at Riverside Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Following a move to California for his wife's job, he became the customer service manager for an academic publishing company in Santa Barbara. Upon relocating to Cincinnati, Ohio, and the birth of his daughter, he made a significant career shift, joining the Cincinnati Police Department as a SWAT hostage negotiator. Later, after relocating to Texas, he founded a school security consulting business and coached high school girls basketball in Houston. Each career pivot has required him to develop new skills and overcome unique challenges, navigating significant learning curves along the way. Terry, welcome to the show.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
I'm looking forward to talking to you as well. Sounds like you've had quite the journey there. Before we dig into it, though, we do like to have a little icebreaker on the show, and your question today is which movie character do you relate to the most and why?
I have to go to with Kevin Costner's character in Field of Dreams, the baseball movie. I mean, if I have one thing on my bucket list before I die, I would like to go with my daughter to that field in Iowa, that cornfield in Iowa, that baseball field in Iowa, and play catch. I mean, I have such great memories growing up with my brothers and I and my dad, tossing the football, playing catch, playing, basketball with each other and stuff like that. So that would probably be the character that I would most associate with.
Okay, well that's a good one. I mean, if you build it, they will come, right? So if you build those dreams, they will come, right?
Absolutely. And my daughter will tell you, I mean, if I watch Field of Dreams, there is a 100% chance I will cry at the end of that movie.
Well, it was an emotional movie.
It was. It was.
It had a really good message in it too. So, for all of our listeners who are maybe dating myself here a little bit, that movie I believe was in the early '90s.
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s, something like that. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it's 20, 30 years old or something like that. And it still resonates. I mean, Major League Baseball, built a Major League Baseball park, it took down more corn and built a Major League Baseball park where they have a game every year, with two teams. So it's a movie I think that touches your heart, and it's something that has lasted, something that's evergreen.
for sure, for sure. Okay, before we get more into the podcast, let's hear a little bit about your journey and how you got to be where you are today. I mean, that is a lot of jumping around. Definitely interested to hear how that came about.
It really is. I mean, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And as you mentioned, I went to college on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. This is long before the internet was available to help people find employment. And again, as you mentioned, I started out as my first job was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's, kind of in the heyday of Wendy's. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. And my next job after that, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. And there is sort of kind of a backstory. My dad's father, my grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury, he was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to lead. So I had a really major decision when I graduated from college. As I said, my dad was dying. I could have said, sorry, Dad, you know what? I'm going to blaze my own trail. I'm going to do my own thing. Out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, my resume looks a little bit more normal, I guess. I did what my father wanted me to do. I went into business. My first 2 jobs were in business. And then I sort of joke. I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away and I followed my own dreams.
Yeah, and then a lot of interesting jumping around there, like we said. Out of all those sort of accomplishments and all those places you've been, which would you say that you kind of enjoyed the most, or you feel is kind of like your biggest sort of peak you climb?
I mean, I think after being a husband and father, I mean, those are far and above the most important things in my life. Being a police officer, it's something that I wanted to do. It was a purpose in my life, and I guess one of the things I'm most proud of is I never let the dream die. I mean, like I said, I was 37 years old getting into law enforcement. That's pretty old to be getting into that line of work. But it was just something I always knew at some point I would get there. At some point I would do it. And the other jobs were great, and I learned a lot of things, but they weren't something that I got out of bed in the mornings like, gosh, I can't go, wait to go to work today. When I was in law enforcement, I couldn't wait to go. I couldn't wait to get up and do whatever we were going to do that day. And I was in the drug unit. Most people laugh when I tell them I'm 6'8" and I was an undercover drug investigator and stuff like that. But, I got to experience a lot of things in law enforcement other than, being in a marked car and chasing a radio. But law enforcement, being a cop it was in my blood. It was something I wanted to do, and I eventually did it.
So, that's amazing. And, it's true. You don't have to stop chasing your dreams just because you're a certain age. There are people that have done major career changes at 60. There are people that have done major career changes at actually, I think the oldest one I remember hearing about, they made a career change at 80. They quit their multi-million. I wish I had this story in front of me. They quit their multi-million-dollar business and they went and sold flowers or something instead. It was a really interesting story. But so in your course of your life there, so what does procrastination mean to you, and how do you define it?
I think it just means putting off things that you're supposed to do. And I'm not going to say I've never procrastinated. I certainly have procrastinated in my life, but I'm not that kind of person. It's like, what needs to get done? Let's get it done. Now, I failed miserably along the ways in getting some of that stuff done. But for example, I wrote a book in 2020, and people went, well, how did you write a book? Because I never expected to write a book, never really wanted to write a book. But I had only had 2 rules when I wrote the book. And the first rule was I will write a minimum of 1 page every day, Monday through Saturday. I'll take Sunday off. And number 2 is I will not edit anything until I have what I feel is a first draft. I mean, honestly, Chris, there were days I would sit out and I would write absolute garbage. It was like, oh my God, this is never going to make it into a book. And then maybe the next day I'd write something that was good, and then maybe garbage again, and then maybe something that was good. And I mean, I think a lot of times in life, we like to think that life is linear. We start here and we just keep climbing. Life's not linear. At least it's never been for me. You start to climb, but then you plateau, and then you might get worse, and then you might grow again, and then plateau again. And I mean, as long as you're moving in the right direction, at least for me, it's never been a straight line. So like I said, I mean, one day I would write 10 pages, and then one day I would write 1 page. And eventually I got to the end and it was like, okay, I've got a first draft. And it was literally, sort of like separating the wheat and the chaff. It's like, garbage, garbage, garbage. No, this is good. Garbage, garbage, garbage. No, this is good. And that's how the book came to be. So it was setting those goals and then having the discipline to implement those goals every day.
Well, it does sound like quite a journey for the book, and I imagine that you probably learned quite a bit about yourself during that process. What do you think that out of that entire process, what do you think you learned about yourself?
I mean, that you've got it in you. I remember reading an article that said 83% of Americans that were surveyed by this company believed that they had a book inside them, whether it was a memoir or a self-help book or whatever it ended up being. And yet less than 1% of those people will ever write that book. And I think a lot of times we think, well, our life doesn't matter. It's no big deal. I mean, there are other people that are more famous, more influential, more powerful. They should write books. But I'll tell you a quick story. I have cancer. I've been battling cancer for 12 years. And I had a nurse who told me this story. And when I first met this nurse, she was relatively young. She was about 25, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit where I'm treated. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling it to you. And Chris, I didn't know how to respond to that. And I was like, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me the story. I think I would enjoy it. So she's in and out and eventually comes in and sits down. She's like, all right, here's the deal. She said, when I first met you, she said, I was going to quit nursing. I had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, then I met you. And I see what you go through every day. I have a really bad reaction to the medicine that I'm given. And she said, then I went back in your file and I went back and read, you had your foot amputated in 2018, your leg amputated in 2020. You've been through all this. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had had a positive impact on her. Whoever is listening to us right now, I can promise you, there are people out there watching how you handle the adversity in your life and would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. So don't ever think that your story, don't ever think your life doesn't matter. I can promise you, whatever you've been through in your life, somebody can benefit from hearing that story.
That is so that's so right, Terry. I mean, there's so many stories about how you touch people's lives, and I'd go out on a limb and say that 80% of the time we don't even know. And it doesn't even have to be anything big. I mean, it could just be as big as simple as just as simple as smiling at somebody as you're walking next to them on the street, or even by just being there, you can make an impact that you don't know about. I mean, there are stories where you standing in line. Somebody recently told me a story about standing in line. And he was just standing in line, patiently waiting, waiting his turn. And, everyone else was getting upset. But the fact that, he was standing there and he didn't get upset, I guess it really impacted a lot of people. And they were saying, wow, here we are being so impatient in this gentleman, right? Who, was waiting patiently to get something he desperately needed, I guess. And he just said, well, you just got to wait your turn. And so everybody else, I guess, after he said that, everybody else sort of like quieted down and got back in line and were more grateful for their own situation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're examples to other people, and how you choose. Somebody once wrote about, how do you approach life? Is it, do I have to, or do I get to? Do I have to go to work this morning, or do I get to go to work this morning? Do I have to take my kids to school, or do I get to take my kids to school? It's all how you approach it. It's your attitude. And I'll be honest. I mean, there are times when I go to treatment, I'm still being treated for tumors I have in my lungs, where it's like, do I have to go and do this? But then it's like, but I get to go and do this because it might keep me alive. It might keep me as part of the family with my wife and daughter and things like that for a little while longer. So, I mean, I kind of bounce back and forth. I mean, there's no S on my chest. I do not wear a cape and fly around with magical powers. So, you have those downtimes. You have those times where, you're hurt and you're mentally and physically and emotionally depleted, and you cry. I cried during my treatments and things like that. And, you find that you're looking inward, that, hey, it's all about me. And I find a real easy way to get around that or to get over that is to then try to go help somebody else. Whether, like you said, whether you just smile at somebody or you say hello or how's it going there? Do you want to have a cup of coffee or do you want to, whatever it ends up being, now all of a sudden the focus is not on, look how bad I've got it. Now all of a sudden the focus is on making a difference in somebody else's life. And that changes your whole perspective.
Well, I mean, we are all in this together, right? So, the more that we help each other, the more we actually help ourselves. And that's something that, it's kind of out there, but it's not that it's hidden, but a lot of people just don't seem to realize that. And it's true because when you're helping someone else, you are fulfilling a sense of purpose in your own life as well. So just going out there and just helping others, like you said, can actually bring your day up too.
Yeah, I can. And when I was a hostage negotiator, they used to tell us, well, when you talk on the phone, when you're talking to somebody, smile. And we were like, smile? I mean, we're 2 blocks away from the guy who's taking a hostage or is barricaded. What do you mean smile? It's like, no, that comes across. That attitude comes across. I mean, when we're together, we have mirror neurons in our brain that if I smile at you, those mirror neurons will react and you'll smile. You don't even realize you're doing it. So it's simple things like that, that if I smile at you, I can get a smile on your face as well. And for some people, that's a pretty big deal. I made somebody's day by making them smile.
Well, it's true. I mean, we don't. A lot of people have the same comment. They say we don't have much to smile about. I've heard approaches that were kind of more tough love approaches to that, where the guy said, "Oh, what do you mean you're not smiling and you're not happy? I mean, you're born and then you die. Everything in between is a bonus because you came in with nothing, you leave with nothing. So everything in between is a bonus." And then the sort of the lighter side or the softer hand to that is that you just take back ownership of your day. I mean, again, with the have tos, have to get to, but also, just simply reframing it a little bit. Do I have to spend time with my daughter? Well, I get to spend time with my daughter, and I'm choosing to spend time with my daughter because I know that those days are limited, and it breaks down that resistance. But it seems that resistance comes and it can sometimes take a really big hold. Have you ever experienced that resistance, and how did you sort of like get over it? Just with the reframe, or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was diagnosed with cancer back in 2012, I was told that I would be dead in 2 years, that they really had nothing to offer me other than surgery. If it was somewhere they could cut it out, they would, but they had no therapies, no drugs, nothing that they could offer me. So my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon. As she used to say, just we're trying to kick the can down the road. This isn't going to cure you. We're just trying to keep the cancer at bay. The side effects of the interferon were that I had terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu, and I mean a really bad case of the flu, every week for 5 years. And as I said, that wasn't going to cure me. I mean, you might be able to say, okay, I can tough this out if I know it's going to cure me. It was, we're just trying to buy you some time. And there was a point where I was so sick of being sick that I just prayed to die. I was like, look, God, there are two camps in life. There are the people that are living, and then there are people that are not dying. And I was in that, or I felt I was in that not dying camp. And I prayed to die. But obviously I didn't die. I mean, that was early in I'm 12 plus years into this cancer fight. That was the first 5 years. And I just, if you want to ask me my goals, I would like goals. My goal is literally get out of bed and make it to the couch. There were no goals. There was nothing. I was just trying literally to survive. But then you ask, who am I surviving for? And it really is not, it's not for you. I mean, I talk about what's gotten me through cancer. I talk about my 3Fs, faith, family, and friends. And there's kind of a funny story. When I had my leg amputated and I had these tumors in my lungs, my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I looked at him and I said, is it going to save my life? He said, yeah, probably not, but might buy you some more time. I said, well, if the outcome's going to be the same, I would rather not go through all that ugliness. I'd rather be healthier and spend more time with my family. I said, but I'll go home and talk to them. So I go home and I started telling my wife and daughter, and my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, So we sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we all feel about me having chemotherapy. And then when we're done with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. And I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that I've been on for the last almost 4 years now. So you got to decide what you're fighting for. Is it you or is it something that's bigger than you?
Well, yeah, you're totally right in that, Terry. And so what would you say to somebody, if they came to you and they said, well, I don't know what I'm going to fight for? How do you think that you should approach that?
I mean, I think you've got to determine what your values are, what's important in your life. And we don't talk about values very much anymore. We don't talk about, those sort of foundational things that are immovable, that that's who I am. That's part of my life. We don't talk about that. And values are usually formed in the first 20 years of your life. I remember before I went to work for the hospital, after I left Wendy's, I interviewed for a marketing job with a packaged goods company. And I spent about an hour and a half with the senior vice president. And we spent the entire time talking about my life from basically the time I was born until I graduated from college. And at the end of the interview, I said to him, I said, I've got to ask you, you never asked me one question about marketing or business or, my philosophies on marketing. And I said, we just talked about my life growing up. I said, why was that? He said, well, I've got plenty of people around me that'll tell me whether you're a good fit for the team. Incidentally, I was not offered the job. And he said, but I want to hire people of good character. And he said, I believe character is formed in the first 20 years of your life, which is why we talked about everything, the experiences you had growing up. And the last thing he said, I believe character is taught. It's not taught. So you're not going to read a book and say, I know what my values are, I'm a person of good character. No, you're going to watch how people experience life, how they handle situations and say things like, boy, I really like the way she handled that issue. Or, boy, I think you kind of, let that person down in dealing with that. So, I think you got to know what your values are. And if you know what your values are, then you can start living for something, I believe, that's bigger than yourself.
Yeah, it's good that you brought up values because it's true. So many of us just work at like literally soul-sucking jobs because we're chasing the almighty dollar because we've lost sight of our values. And that's actually gotten worse with the internet age and so much distraction out there. How would you say just giving somebody advice that came to you and said, what do I do if I'm working a job that's crushing my soul and yet it's supporting my family? Do I keep doing that job or do I go for something that's going to be more aligned?
I think that's an individual decision, but I will say this. I think it's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. I would suggest finding people that care about you, that are willing to invest in you, that want to see you become successful in life, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together. I mean, there's so many people out there that if you don't know your values, somebody else is going to have you working, like you say, a soul-sucking job to support their values. So understand what your values are and what's important. And a lot of times we talk about purpose in life. And I believe we all have a purpose. There's a reason we're all here. But a lot of times we confuse purpose with our job or occupation. Now, it would be great if your purpose was your job or your occupation. It doesn't have to be. I mean, your job could be over here. It's what like you say, it's what you do to support your family. But your purpose is over here. It's to paint or to write or to be a podcast host or be an activist or whatever it is you feel is in your heart. And I always, especially when I speak to groups of young people, I always tell them, if there is something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be those things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back.
That is so true. I mean, there's nobody that's on their deathbed. They're saying, "Man, I wish I put in like 7 more overtime hours." And so that is very true. Just speaking about purpose and life mission, why don't you tell us about what you've got going on right now, and sort of where you see that go?
Well, I talk about, I wrote my first book, Sustainable Excellence, and it's a book about what I think people can do to be successful in life. Almost as soon as I finished writing that book, I felt there was kind of a tug. I want to write another book, and I want that book to also be about a word that starts with the letter S, but that word is significance. Success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for other people. So literally for almost a year now, I've been working on this second book that I still don't really have a title for, about how we can be significant, how we can be of service to other people in their lives. And what happens with that? I hope it generates conversation. I hope it makes people think about, and I guess I don't mean to be one of those people that, kind of always piles on young people, but I think COVID, I mean, it's the me generation. It's all about me. It's, these are my values. These are what I think. You've got to do this for me. I don't have to do anything for anybody. I mean, nobody's coming to your aid. If you want something in life, figure that out and go get it, because nobody's going to give it to you. It's not that they don't like you. It's just that they like themselves more, and they're spending a lot more time worrying about and dealing with the things that they want out of life. So nobody's going to come to your aid. So in your life, you've got to decide what you're going to do and how you're going to go after it. And I think once you do that, I mean, COVID, if it taught us anything, it's that we're better together than we are separately. You saw during COVID, alcoholism rates rise, drug abuse rates rise, domestic violence rates rise. We need each other to be successful in life. Nobody is successful in a vacuum. Nobody does it by themselves. There's always other people there to support you. Surround yourself with those people. Surround yourself with people that care about you, that uplift you, that love you enough to tell you the truth, even if it sacrifices the relationship that they have with you.
Well, you hit a couple of points really well there as well. In terms of COVID and just sort of the psychology behind it, I think what happened, especially with the younger people, is that, the older generations, we've been through different things where, we've had to adjust. We've been through, well, okay. I didn't really go through recession, but my wife went through rationing and stuff in a foreign country, right? So, she's been kind of used to that. I actually wrote out COVID in Central America, and the thing with it is that the younger generation have always had anything. They didn't really have this experience of having, little things taken away, right? Because we're all used to that. We're all used to that, kindergarten, you get nap time taken away, or when you get older, you stop getting recess or time outside. But COVID was just, you don't get anything, so I think that the major outcome to that, and again, not agreeing or condoning with any behaviors, but the major outcome of that was this major fear that they are going to have everything taken away from them, like for good. And so I can understand that the sentiment of where it comes from. But again, like you said, success doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the question that I always ask people when they're doing it is exactly like, who are you doing it for? And I mean, if it's for yourself, okay, well, let's say you're the only person in existence. Would you still be doing it? And then therein lies sort of the answer that they're looking for.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's so important. I mean, my daughter graduated from the United States Air Force Academy. So, I mean, I don't want people to think that I'm down on young people. I don't. I think I've met so many amazing young people that are interesting and want to make a difference, want to make an impact on the world. But there's an entrepreneur by the name of Ed Milet. He's all over social media and things like that. And I remember listening to him talk about the 4 types of people in the world. And after he talked about it, I'm like, is that really true? Is that really something that I can get on board with? And the first group that he talked about, he said, were the unmotivated. And he said, that's the vast majority of people you will run across in your life. And I thought, yeah, that in a lot of ways is true. And the next group he talked about was the motivated. He said it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. He says it's kind of low level, works for a lot of people to be very happy and successful in their life. And then the third group he talked about were the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from 2 words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you are moving people with your energy. And then the last group he talked about were the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And sometimes, depending on who I'm talking with, if it's a group, I'll tell that story. And then it's like, all right, show hands. How many people are unmotivated? Nobody ever raises their hand. Nobody ever says, I'm not motivated. But if you believe me, and I'm old enough to kind of look at it and say, yeah, there's a lot of people that are just kind of, as you say, they're in these sort of energy sucking jobs. They're just muddling through their lives without any direction, without any purpose, without any meaning whatsoever. And you look at them and you think, I think kind of 2 things. One, how horrible that must be to live like that. And then number 2, that's great, because if you even have a little bit of grit in your life, you can be incredibly successful, because there's so many people that aren't even willing to look for the purpose that they're supposed to do in their life.
I really like that story, Terry, but I wouldn't be surprised that nobody raised their hands. I mean, if you're unmotivated, would you even have the motivation to raise your hand?
That's true.
And so, but yeah, all joking aside, I mean, it's true. Talking about motivations and things, I tend to like to steer it towards towards inspiration as well, just because it's more from a place of joy and happiness. The motivation, I find, when you do surface level motivations, or it almost always comes from like a negative place. We spend so much of our lives just either protecting ourselves from getting hurt, or preventing some tragedy, or just being afraid, right? So one of the first things, I guess, is to just take fear by the horns and just get going, which it seems like you've got that amazing backstory, Terry, and I think you're probably one of the bravest people that we've had on the show. Just everything you've been through and everything you've done. How do you look at, like, especially being a hostage negotiator, like, how do you sort of compartmentalize that? Because I imagine that at some point brought a lot of fear.
I mean, it was certainly high stress. I mean, let's face it, if you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, you're probably having one of the worst days, if not the worst day in your life. But one of the things we did is, you try to humanize the relationship. And again, a lot of times we were on scene having no idea why we were there. Why did this person grab a gun and barricade themselves? We have no idea. So we're not gonna play the authority role as I'm the police. It's going to be more, hey, Chris, I'm Terry, or, hey, I'm Terry. What do you want me to call you? And sometimes it's, you don't need to know my name. Okay, that's fine. How do you want me to address you? And the other thing that we used to do was called tactical empathy. And I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. And that is, help me to understand why we're here. Help me to understand what's going on. And the important word there is understand. It's not agree with. I mean, if you're a homicide suspect that just killed 3 people, I wasn't going to say what you did was right or good, but I want to understand, because understanding breeds trust, and trust leads me to a point where I can hopefully get you out safely. But there were, a lot of times after call-ups, it was like, okay, really stressful. All right, we're all going out to the bar for a drink. And I never went to the bar for a drink. I love these people. I would give my life for these people. I trained with these people. But my sanctuary, where I was grounded, was with my family. So it was going to a bar and having a few drinks did nothing for me. Going home and spending time with my wife and daughter, people who love me unconditionally, that's where I got my grounding. That's where that was the foundation for me. So I think you've got to decide what is that for you. I mean, if it's going out with the guys and the team and having some drinks, good, then go do that. But that didn't get it for me. I had something I thought, at least for me, that was bigger, that was more important.
No, and it is very interesting when you talk about those different stress outlets as well. Everybody's different. Some people go to the vices, some people go to family, some people go to the church, some people go to we're all different, right? But I think that the most important part of that is just understanding that everybody has different processes. Well, like you said, just understanding. And then that way you can actually bond over that. You don't necessarily agree with the way they do it, but that's just one of the ways you bond.
I mean, it is, and they didn't. I wasn't ostracized because I didn't go out for a drink, and I didn't ostracize them because they did go out for a drink. Like you say, we just handled the stress in a different way. And as long as I think you have that outlet, whether I'm going to go run 10 miles because this was a really stressful call, whatever it is, to get that out of your system. I mean, you see things, and we were successful probably 90% of the time of getting people out safely. But about 10% of the time, people made the choice to end their lives. And while that was always tragic, and I don't mean to sound cold or callous here, I never lost any sleep over that for really three reasons. One, I knew I had great training. Two, I knew I worked with good people. And number three, I knew I did everything I could to try to get you out safely. But at the end of the day, it was really your decision on how this was going to end. Are you going to come out? Are you going to end your life? Are we going to have to send the tactical team in to get you? Whatever that is, that was going to be your decision. But I did everything I could to try to get these people out safely. Because no matter how bad you were, quote unquote, there was always somebody somewhere that loved you. A child, a parent, a spouse, significant other, whoever it was. There's almost always somebody that loves you. And if you can get people to understand that, again, stop focusing on you. Who is it out there? Is it your daughter? Hey, do you really want to do this? Does this want to be the last memory your daughter has of you? Or do you want to come out and see your daughter? Well, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. But you're still here. You can still communicate with your daughter. You can still have influence in her life, even if you are in prison.
Yeah. And a lot of that is, I kind of like the way that a couple of people put it. I don't like, quoting Hollywood and things, but one of the big examples, I guess, was Michael Douglas's Falling Down, right? I mean, we're all just, we're all just really, literally, we're all just like one bad day away from just going postal on somebody. And, we all like to play the hero and say, no way, no way. And then all of a sudden we don't get, sugar in our coffee, and it's like, hey, what did they sound like? It's funny, but that we're so quick to judge and say that, oh, we're better, but then, literally 30 seconds later we're all the same.
We are. And my brother told me a story. My brother's for like 25 years, he was president of the Catholic high school where we went. Now he's the president of that school. He's been for the last 3 years. And it's a Marist Brothers school. And the Marist Brothers are into education. They have schools all over the world. And they asked him, they said, hey, will you go to Guatemala and kind of look at our school in Guatemala? And my brother was like, third world country. I don't know how safe I feel. He said, we get off the plane at like 10 o'clock at night. The only people in the airport are these armed guards with AK-47s. He said, we're put into a convoy with armed security. He said, we're driving through town, and every business has an armed guard in front of it. He said, we get to the Marist compound where we're going to spend the night. He said, there's an armed guard in front of the compound. He said, we spend the night. He said, the next morning we go up into the mountains where the Marist High School is. And he said, I'm driving past all these fields, farmers' fields and things like that. And so we get to the high school, and I'm talking to the principal. And I said to him, how do you handle, fighting and bullying and, just the cliques that people have and stuff like that? And the principal looked at him and said, excuse me? He said, well, how do you handle it here? How do you handle the fighting, the cliques, all this negativity, all this bullying? And he said to my brother, he said, we don't have that here. He said, these kids understand that the only way to get out of abject poverty, he said, these kids live in dirt, huts with dirt floors and no running water. The only way they're going to get out of this or get their families out of it is to get an education. So there's none of these first world problems that we have here in the United States do these third world countries have, because they realize this is it. If I don't do this, I'm just basically perpetuating the cycle of poverty again in my family. So I have an opportunity to raise my family up. I'm not going to worry about bullying somebody or being in a clique. I'm worried about getting an education and helping my family on the farm. The principal said, we end school at 1 o'clock every afternoon so that these kids can go back to their families and work their farms, until it's time to do their homework and then start over the next day.
And you're right. I mean, in a lot of ways, we've been spoiled. I mean, there's a reason they call it first world. That's a first world problem, right?
Right.
There's a big meme about it. We kind of laugh about it, but it is. I mean, we tend to take a lot of things for granted. I myself, I spent well, I guess a little bit more than half my life actually living in third world countries, and it's true. It's very different. People tend to share more. People tend to I'm not going to say they care more. There's still callousness, but it's fascinating to see that, once we take away all these shiny toys, and I saw this in my own daughter too, right? Like, when we were down there, she never had a cell phone. She never, tablets, what have you, right? We come up to, we come back to North America, and all of a sudden, she never had an issue with bullies. She never had an issue with people that didn't like her, and now all of a sudden it's like we have this, we have to be better, we have to one up, we have to, we have to be like them, and it's just fascinating. Why do you think that difference is?
I have really not traveled much in my life. My wife has traveled all over the world for her job, and I think it's just an appreciation of what you have, because you might not have it tomorrow. If I have food, if I have water, if I have a roof over my head and clothes, in a lot of places, you're better than about 80% of the people in the world. I mean, poverty, we think that, poverty is bad here. And I'm not saying it's not, don't get me wrong. But compared to some other countries, I mean, you would be considered rich in other countries. So I think it's all perspective. It's this perception that the world is the way I see it. But the world is the way you see it based on your upbringing, your education, your faith, the things that you've been through in your life. And I think if we could all kind of change that to perspective, what's the perspective, not the perception? The perception is only germane to me and to nobody else. The perspective is, well, Chris is XYZ. Can I understand Chris based on what he's been through, where he's lived, what his relationship is with his family? Can I walk in Chris's shoes and understand that perspective? We don't think about that. I mean, the world is the way we see it, but that's only germane to us. If we could sort of change that paradigm and say, can I see the world through other people's eyes, through the other experiences or lack of experiences that they've had in their life, it really does kind of change how we view the world and we view other people.
That's very true. I mean, one of the things that I deal with a lot with people too is I just say, when we're not, again, we're understanding, but we're not, condoning or accepting. But we have to understand that everybody does the best that they can with the information they have at the time. And that is a universal truth that is true for everybody. Nobody's going to go out and do what they think is going to be harmful to them, or immediately harmful to themselves, at least, right? And it's true, because you go back to the 1950s, and doctors were tooting Camels as the best cigarettes and healthy, and all sorts of things, right? And it's like, well, how can how dare the doctors do this? And they were just operating on the information they had at the time. It was totally wrong information, but they were still doing the best that they could with what they knew at the time, right? And that sort of slants the view a little bit, because it hits a little closer to home than that old, they didn't know any better. Well, okay. Well, go deeper. Why didn't they know any better? What information did they have? And then you can start to more understand, because if we just say, oh, they didn't know any better, well, then you're kind of dismissing it. You're not really trying to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, even in my life, when I was a teenager, in the 70s, when you had acne, you went to the dermatologist. And what did the dermatologist do? Put you under a sun lamp, basically gave you a tan, which it's like, wait a minute, that leads to melanoma. But we didn't know that even in my lifetime, to experience. It was like, well, we need to dry out, these pimples and things like that. So we'll put you under a sun lamp. No, but we didn't know that. I mean, research had not advanced to where it is today. So yeah, I mean, you do the best you can with what you have. And, I don't try to judge anybody. I don't try to say I'm better than anybody, because I have this or I did that or thing. I have been very, very fortunate in my life, and I am very grateful to our creator and my parents and the decisions that I've made in life. But it's not about saying I'm better than you. It's about saying, can we work together? Can we help each other? Because you can learn from anybody. I mean, people used to, enforcement isn't a career that is very desirable these days, but every now and then somebody will reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in a career in law enforcement. What do you suggest? And I always tell them, put your devices down. Go out on the street. Talk to the homeless guy. Get in his head. Understand where he's coming from or she's coming from or why they're in that situation. And then go up to the penthouse and talk to that person. If you can talk to people, if you can empathize with other human beings, you can be good as a police officer.
Mm. Well, no, I'd venture so far as to say not only a police officer, but just any profession.
Yeah,
If you can relate, yeah, you can relate to anybody. You'll pretty much do well in any profession, but definitely, you know, anything to do with healthcare, law enforcement, even teaching. As long as you can relate to people, you're good to go.
it is so much about, and what people don't get, it is about the connections. One of the nurses that cares for me used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life, end of life care. And she gave me a book to read, and the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near death experiences. They basically died for a period of time, and then medical science is able to get them back. And a lot of interesting things in the book. But one of the big takeaways I took from that was that no matter who the person having the near death experience saw, whether it was a saint or God or an angel or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody got asked one question: how do you care for my people? In other words, how do we care for each other? How do we have the relationships, the connections we have? Chris, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember you and I were here. But I hope what I can be remembered for are those connections, are those relationships that I had with other human beings.
Mm. Oh, for sure, and it it's kind of an interesting question when you get into 100 years, is anybody going to care? And well, yeah, because it's the ripple effect. Because we are all, it's been proven, we are all energy. We all transfer information in our DNA down to our next of kin. And you may not specifically be remembered, but your traditions and the way you treated people. I mean, I still carry forward values that my grandfather had, that my father had, and I'm trying to instill those same values, into my daughter. So no, they may not remember specifically what we did, and it's true. I mean, it's like that famous saying, nobody's going to remember what you did specifically, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, great Maya Angelou quote there. And it's true. I
Yeah.
mean, we don't, all this other stuff. It's those connections. It's those relationships. Did you hurt me? Did you make me feel bad? Or did you uplift me and make me feel better? I mean, think about the teachers that had an impact on you growing up. You remember them not because they belittled you, but you remembered them because they brought you up. They made you better. They made you do things that you didn't think it was even possible for you to do. That's why they're still in your memory.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, we are coming up towards the end of our time here, Terry. Was there anything that you felt maybe I should have asked or something we should have touched on that we did today?
I guess let me leave you with this story, another story, if I may. I one of my nurses again. Oh, I got a sports and nurse story. Sorry, Chris. It's one of the nurses who was caring for me a couple months ago. She said, what was it like to have your foot amputated in 2018 and your leg amputated in 2020? And as you can imagine, I told her, I said, it certainly has not been easy. I mean, I'm 6'8", so learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this height, so it's not something I really want to do. But what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Chris. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a tremendous amount of time, at the gym working on our bodies and eating right, and getting enough rest, reducing stress. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. You absolutely should do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day, spend a little more time working on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. We know at some point in time, this body is going to die, it's going to decay, it's going to go away. But our heart, our mind, and our soul, those things I believe are eternal. Those things live on. And I just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as maybe we should.
That is very true. We often tend to go for what's visible, right? We don't tend to look at the other things for sure. And so just before we wrap things up here, Terry, what's the best way for somebody to go get your book or get out in touch with you?
I mean, Sustainable Excellence is available anywhere you can get a book online, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Apple iBooks. The best way to get in touch with me is I have a website called Motivational Check. You can leave me a message there, and that's motivationalcheck.com.
Great. And for our listeners, don't worry about that. We'll be putting that in the show notes. And just once again, Terry, thank you for coming and being on the show. And, to all our listeners, thanks again for tuning in for your dose of inspiration and motivation. And, if you can't find that inspiration or motivation for yourself today, just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we will see you again next time.